In this garden, there are representatives of two classes of plants. These bearing flowers are called angiosperms. Most of the plants of the world are angiosperms. They are seed-bearing plants. The other kind of plants, represented by this spruce tree, also bear seeds, but in a different manner from the angiosperms. These non-flowering seed plants are the subject of this film. They are called gymnosperms. In this film, you will see that gymnosperms are seed plants that are well represented on the continent of North America by vast forests of conifers. The word gymnosperm means naked seed. The seeds of gymnosperms are borne on the scales of cones or stems rather than within fruits, as in angiosperms. Some of the lesser-known gymnosperms, such as the ginkgo, are cultivated in North America. Conifers are our major timber crop. Bristlecone pines and sequoias, our oldest living things, are important as a means of dating past events. Vast coniferous forests cover large regions of the world. In these forests you will find pines, firs, hemlocks, cedars, larches, and redwoods. Our most important timber crops come from these trees. In North America, the richest development of conifers is found in 5 great forest regions. They are the northern or boreal forest, the northwest coastal coniferous forest, the Rocky Mountain coniferous forest, the Cascade Sierra coniferous forest, and the southeastern evergreen forest. All of these regions have shallow or sandy soil, and some are also arid. Coniferous trees grow well in these areas because their thin, narrow leaves reduce water loss by evaporation. Some of our most desirable recreational areas are located within these regions. Since pines are the best-known conifers, let's take a closer look at one species. On the branches, you will find 2 kinds of leaves. These small, flat scales are leaves that occur singly on branches. Spur shoots with clusters of needle-like leaves grow in the axils of the scale leaves. The red pine has 2 needle-like leaves growing in a cluster from each axil. Other pine species may have 2, 3, or 5 needle-like leaves. This white pine has 5 leaves in its cluster. Pine trees bear 2 kinds of cones, cones that produce pollen and cones that produce seeds sometime after pollination. Pollen cones usually grow in clusters. The cones rarely exceed 1/2 inch in length and are found on the lower branches of the tree. In this longitudinal section drawing of a pollen cone, you can see how the cone leaves are attached to the central axis of the cone. On the underside of each cone leaf are the pollen sacs. Contained within these pollen sacs are the cells, called microspore mother cells. Each of these mother cells divides and forms 4 small spores called microspores. Soon the microspores separate from one another, and the outer walls of each enlarge to form wings. Development now takes place within the microspores, and mature pollen grains, or male gametophytes, are formed after several nuclear divisions. The wing helps to sustain the pollen grain in the air when it is carried away by the wind. These pollen cones are mature. After their pollen is shed, they shrivel and die. In the springtime, you can watch the pollen cones emerging from their buds. Their pollen is so abundant that it may blanket an entire region. Seed-bearing cones are generally borne high up on the tree. At maturity, a seed cone may be from 1 inch to 2 feet in length. Just as soon as pollen is shed from these pollen cones, these young seed cones will be pollinated. The pollen is wind-blown. The transfer of pollen from pollen cones to seed cones is called pollination. The events taking place within the seed or ovulate cone at the time of pollination cannot be seen by the unaided eye. So let's watch this action in this longitudinal section drawing. The scales of the young seed cone are spread apart. The ovules are on the upper side of each cone scale. These ovules contain the large spores which will develop into female gametophytes. The ovules lie close to the axis of the cone. Wind-blown pollen falls or tumbles to the base of each scale. Now pollinated, the scales are drawn together and the cone remains closed until the seeds are mature. Now let's section our cone crosswise so that we can look down on the upper area of one scale. 2 ovules lie side by side on each scale. We will watch the fertilization process in one ovule. First, the pollen grains come in contact with a sticky fluid secreted by the ovule. This liquid withdraws, and some of the pollen grains are carried with the liquid to a saucer-shaped depression called the pollen chamber. Now the arms of the ovule close and begin to wither. The pollen grains germinate, and pollen tubes containing the sperms grow and digest their way toward the female gametophyte, which contains the developing eggs. Pollen tubes grow slowly. A sperm nucleus does not reach an egg nucleus until the spring of the year after pollination. When a pollen tube finally makes contact with an egg, it discharges its sperms. One sperm unites with the egg nucleus and fertilization is completed. The fertilized egg is called a zygote. By cell division, the zygote grows into a new organism, and the resulting structure is the pine embryo. These embryos reach full growth during the second spring after pollination, and the seed matures. In this sectioned pine seed, you can see the seed coat, the embryo with its several cotyledons, or seed leaves, and the stored food surrounding the embryo. By time-lapse photography, during the fall of the second year, you can see the pine cones opening and the seeds being exposed. Many of the seeds fall out and are blown away. Some seeds may remain lodged in the cone for several years. These pine seeds that are landing may remain dormant for many years, but some will begin to grow the following spring if conditions for growth are favorable. Now, by time-lapse photography, you can watch a pine seed germinating. Note the several cotyledons, or seed leaves, and the seed coat covering their tops. Now the seed coat falls from the cotyledons, and a new pine tree is on its way toward independent life. Although the reproductive process in the life of pines takes place over a period of 3 years, most of the stages of pollen and seed cone development can be seen on a single tree during a favorable spring. Here are pollen cones, young seed cones, second-year cones, and old seed cones. Nearby, seed germination may be found in a favorable area. Thus, in pine and other gymnosperms, pollen and seeds are born in cones, and pollination is the transfer of pollen from the pollen cones to the developing seed cones. Now that we know something about pine, Let us look at a few other conifers and lesser-known gymnosperms. Spruce and fir are our favorite Christmas trees. These trees and most other important conifers are evergreen. That is, their leaves persist for more than one season. But not all conifers are evergreen. In North America, the larch of the northern bogs and the bald cypress of southeastern swamps are deciduous conifers that lose their needles in autumn. An interesting group of more primitive gymnosperms of North America, called cycads, resemble dwarf palms. Cycads flourish in the southern hemisphere, but a number of them have been introduced to North America and are cultivated in greenhouses and out of doors in warm regions like southern California and southern Florida. There are several cycads native to North America, and one is native in southern Florida. It is called zamia. The stem of zamia is a tuberous structure with cones growing on its tip. A single plant produces pollen cones or seed cones, but not both. We can readily see that this plant is a gymnosperm, for here, exposed on the scales of this dissected cone, are the seeds. Another lesser-known gymnosperm is ephedra. It is native to the southwest desert regions of North America. The important drug ephedrine, now manufactured synthetically, was once extracted from this plant. In many parks in the more temperate regions of our continent, you can find the ornamental maidenhair, or ginkgo tree. It, like the zamia, will produce only pollen or seed cones on a single tree. The ginkgo is frequently referred to as a living fossil, for it is the only living representative of a group of ancient gymnosperms. In the ginkgo, the seeds are not borne in cones, but are borne on the ends of short branches. Thus, these odd plants fit the broad classification of gymnosperms. Until 1959, the giant coniferous sequoia trees of California were considered to be the oldest living things on Earth. Some of these trees are known to have lived for over 3,000 years. This cross-section shows growth rings from 925 A.D. to the beginning of the Civil War in 1861. But this grotesque and stubby tree that grows in the White Mountains of California is believed to be the oldest living thing. It is called the bristlecone pine. In 1956, Dr. Edmund Schulman of the University of Arizona Laboratory of Tree Ring Research discovered that some of the bristlecone pines are 1,000 years older than any of the dated sequoias. Tree ring research is a study of past climatic changes interpreted from the annual rings. Enough 4,000-year-old bristlecone pines have been found to reveal the cycles of wet and dry weather in the Southwest since 2000 B.C. It has also been possible to determine the age of some of our prehistoric Indian dwellings by comparing the pattern of wide and narrow rings in the old bristlecones with corresponding patterns in timbers taken from the ancient Indian dwellings. But the 4,000 years of history recorded by living specimens of the bristlecone pine is a mere instant in time compared with the millions of years recorded by gymnosperm fossils that tell us that gymnosperms flourished long before the reign of dinosaurs. In this film, we have seen the extensive distribution of conifers throughout North America and have observed some of the lesser-known gymnosperms. Using pine as an example, we have seen how gymnosperms reproduce. We depend on gymnosperms for many useful products. For employment and for pleasure. There is still much to be learned about gymnosperms. Only through the continued work of our botanists and geologists, and those who will follow in this work, will we continue to learn more and more about this important and interesting class of plants.